Alright, I can't really believe people are doing this, right? There's people out there using wasp spray, putting it on a plate, letting it crystallize, and proceeding to inhale, smoke, snort, or even inject it, all just to get a fix. This is one of the most disturbing practices I've seen yet, and shows how far addiction can take someone. And like anything on this channel, whether it be deadly, healing, somewhere in between, or even completely inactive, we're here to cover the ins and outs of it. This is Wasping. Yo, what's good? It's someone that's known one, and welcome back to another Substance Explained video. Today, we're diving into one of the most dangerous and bizarre trends I've seen yet, wasping. Wasping is the recreational inhalation of aerosolized insecticides, or more commonly known as bug spray, or specifically wasp spray. It's often sprayed onto a surface where it gets heated and then inhaled for a short but intense high. It's kind of comparable to the air duster we broke down a few years back. Just like that, wasping is incredibly harmful, physically and neurologically. We're talking effects like hallucinations, tremors, organ failure, and even death. We'll break down exactly what wasping is, how it affects the body, and why it stands out as one of the most extreme examples of substance abuse today. What is it? Chemical class. Wasping involves inhaling bug spray, which is a hazardous mix of industrial chemicals, primarily pyrethrins or pyrethroids, and sometimes organophosphates, but more so in the past. Then you have some extra ingredients, which include synergists, solvents, and hydrocarbon propellants like butane or propane. If it isn't clear, none of these are designed for human consumption. They're insect neurotoxins and volatile industrial gases. Legal and medical status. Insecticides are legal household products, but using them to get high is technically not legal or approved for medical use. Technically, it's a form of inhalant abuse, which is grouped under substance misuse disorder in the clinical setting. Intended use. Bug sprays are intended to kill or repel insects, often by targeting their nervous systems. And again, they're not formulated with human safety in mind beyond your casual contact, and certainly not for inhalation. History. Synthesis background. Unlike some of the more traditional substances we covered, wasping doesn't stem from a single compound or inventor. The Insecticide Resistance Action Committee, the IRAC, currently classifies 297 active ingredients used in insecticides, organized into about 40 to 45 mode of action categories. So bug spray formulas vary, but two chemical classes have shown up the most: pyrethrins, or pyrethroids, group 3A, and organophosphates, group 1B. In the case of wasping, at least after the 2000s, pyrethroids have been the main chemical class used in spray due to health concerns, so we'll mainly focus on those for this video. The synergist, piperonobutoxide, or PBO, has also been included in bug sprays ever since the 1940s to enhance their efficiency, so we'll also bring this up quite a bit. But how did we get here? Organophosphates may have been the first synthesized forms of bug repellent, alongside organochlorines. These were first synthesized in Germany in the 1930s, originally as nerve agents for the war. Chemist Gerhard Strader discovered their insecticidal properties while developing tabun, the first organophosphate nerve gas. But after World War II, the Allies gained access to this research, and compounds like malathion and chlorpyrifos became common in agriculture and pest control. Meanwhile, the story of pyrethroids traces back even further. We've been using chrysanthemum flowers as natural insect repellents for centuries now, in places like Persia and China. Now, the synthesis is a little bit complicated, but it goes far as back as the 1870s, where it was first characterized, but actual work began in 1909 by Unichi Fujitani in Japan. but it would take decades of work for it to actually be synthesized. Eventually, by the 1940s, the first synthetic versions were born, like allothorins. Over time, as concerns grew over stability and environmental persistence, newer formulations like permethrin became dominant. Today, permethrin is not only the most widely used pyrethroid, but it's also found in all kinds of bug-resistant products, from bug sprays to lice creams, mosquito nets, etc. Then there's also piperonal-butoxide, PBO, which was also developed around the same time in the 1940s by Herman Wachs. It was made with the intent to enhance the effects of pyrethrins, which was found very effective and was quickly applied to most bug products and still is today. Then there's the concern of the solvents and propellants with this as well, as if there isn't enough going on. But it's used to aerosolize the spray and isn't necessarily a part of the bug spray ingredients like that, but it is present. Technically these can be synthesized, but for economic reasons, they tend to be extracted from natural gases. Cultural significance. So wasping isn't something that really holds cultural value. It's more like a disturbing outcome of tough situations in certain communities, especially ones facing poverty or addiction issues. Most of the stories come from rural areas, like parts of Appalachian Kentucky, where resources can be limited and drug access restricted. Geography, isolation, and heavy policing may all play a role in why people turn to things like bug spray. Before all this, wasping got lumped in with other forms of inhalant abuse, like paint, glue, or air duster. The earliest report I can find comes from 1979, where someone reports people would spray it on parsley and try to sell it as a drug. Not exactly what's going on today, but still, it is consumption of wasp spray. There's some other obscure reports, but the actual trend, if you even want to call it that, started getting noticed on its own around the 2010s, mostly through random internet forums. But even with all the shock factor, wasping has never really become common. Most people know spraying something like right into your body is a terrible idea. When it does happen, it's probably a sign someone is in a really bad place mentally or emotionally, maybe going through a crisis or a deep addiction. It is most often linked to meth users, and there's been reports of people inhaling, smoking, snorting, and even injecting wasp spray. We'll get into more of these cases in a little. In communities where it happens though, it points to bigger issues, like the lack of mental health supports or economic opportunity. So while it's definitely not a cultural trend, it is a red flag for deeper issues going on. Taxonomy. So this is kind of a weird section, like the synthesis part, because we're talking about something that isn't necessarily a formal substance people regularly consume. We could get more in depth by breaking down potential compounds in the pyrethroid family, but since wasping can involve a mix of ingredients depending on the product, we'll stick with a broader classification. Technically, it is inhalant abuse, specifically what's known as volatile substance misuse. This includes the misuse of solvents like paint thinner, gases like propane, and aerosol sprays, like bug spray in this case. Also, some toxicologists may label this as chemical coping, which is pretty much what it sounds like. The reasoning can vary, but in the case of wasping, it often comes down to accessibility. These products are easy to get, especially when someone's usual drug of choice, most commonly methamphetamine in this case, isn't available. So for some people, the next best thing would be to abuse wasp spray. Pharmacology. Mechanism of action. Alright, so let's see what's actually going on with this. Yeah, it's bug spray. Obviously it's going to be bad for you in some way, right? But how does this actually work on bugs and then humans? Pyrethroids act on voltage gated sodium channels in nerve cells, basically the gates that open and close to send electrical signals. Normally, they just open briefly to allow sodium ions to pass, then close again for normal functioning. Pyrethroids lock these channels open, flooding the system with sodium ions. For insects, this kind of causes an electrical meltdown or neuroexcitation, causing spasms, seizures, paralysis, and then death. In other words, they die because their brain and nervous system is pretty much overloaded to death by having all of their senses firing off simultaneously. And on top of this, you have the piperonobutaxide, or the PBO, where this further inhibits the defense mechanisms of the bug. Most importantly, cytochrome P450, where they could detoxify this. So pretty much this means, over time, higher levels are going to stay in the bug than they would otherwise, potentially giving a slow death even if it does escape. Now in humans, it's a little different. We're not insects. We have better protective enzymes and different nervous systems, but that doesn't make it safe. What we're describing here is neurotoxicity. Pyrethroids can absolutely mess with human sodium, and research does suggest more activity with other ion channels, such as voltage-gated calcium and chloride channels, impacting the sympathetic nervous system. This might explain the meth-like effects that gets reported, though agitation and paranoia are probably more likely. And there also may be some indirect activity with GABA going on. And the PBO theoretically could increase these effects, though there is research that does suggest the effect isn't as significant as it is with bugs. PBO also has found to antagonize cannabinoid receptors. As for the solvents and propellants, that adds a whole nother layer. Those gases can cause hypoxia, a lack of oxygen, and solvent intoxication, which could be much worse. So while we might not die quickly like insects, the side effects and risk just don't make this worth it. Metabolism. In terms of metabolism, we need to be mindful of how these substances are consumed, as data is very limited, especially when it comes to abuse. Permethrin will serve as our reference point due to how commonly it's used and studied. The most common route of exposure appears to be inhalation. When absorbed through the lungs, this route bypasses first-pass metabolism in the liver, allowing for one of the most fastest onsets. Unfortunately, most of our understanding of metabolism comes from liver-based studies. Using permethrin as an example, the compound undergoes hydrolysis by esterase, followed by oxidation via cytochrome P450 enzymes. Typically, metabolites are excreted in 1 to 2 days. There is also some research on dermal and oral exposure, which does confirm metabolic degradation does occur and highlights the potential toxicity of these compounds. Again, the PBO could be playing a role and may impact the timing of all this as well, as it is metabolized through the same enzymes. And finally, with the solvents, some may act as P450 inhibitors, potentially altering the metabolic profile, where it could either prolong or intensify the experience. Half-life. Okay, the half-life. How long does it take for at least half of the substance to be cleared from the body? This depends a ton on the ingestion method, and most data we have is involved with the liver. We find that the plasma half-life is somewhere between 12 and 33 hours in humans, with a topical and dermal study demonstrating 16 hours, possibly longer. But it is shown they can be pretty lipophilic and can accumulate in fat tissues, where the half-life can be extended with chronic use. But again, it all depends on how they take it, so the numbers can vary, and the PBO seems to follow a similar timeline. The experience. Effects. Okay, so what effects could someone expect from wasping? We've broken it down scientifically and historically, so you're probably wondering, what the hell is this drug experience even like? Well, as for effects, in terms of what may be considered positive, in fact the only reason people may do this at all, is to fulfill a hole that methamphetamine has made for them. With the activity we broke down, the user could theoretically experience a kind of rush similar to meth, or at least enough to make them feel okay in the meantime, enough to satisfy the urges for a meth rush. Euphoria could be possible, heightened alertness could also be likely, but the negative effects outweigh those possibilities. Here are some possible effects: hyperexcitability, twitching, spasms, seizure, hallucinations, delirium, respiratory irritation, weakness, nausea, confusion, neurotoxicity, cardiovascular disturbance, blurred vision, salivation, a burning sensation, swelling, long-term buildup, and more. Chronic exposure just increased these risks further. Fear of health risk should be common, as well as possible psychological concerns, as suicidal ideation has been reported. Now, I will say that regardless of all these adverse effects, there have been cases demonstrating the opposite, showing little to no significant repercussions when presented in the medical setting. Because of this, these effects can be difficult to determine exactly since there are variances amongst different insecticide products, and the way they take it also plays a big role. Maybe the heating method being used could be making it less harmful. At the same time though, we see fatality as possible. Subjectivity. What does it feel like? So this is somewhat complex and hard to break down, at least fully accurately, because most times it's coming from meth users being desperate. While some satisfaction does seem to be reported, it often ends in distress. It'll depend on the way it's taken typically, but most times there is a burning sensation, whether that's through the nose, throat, or somewhere else on the body if it's injected. If it is taken orally, nausea and vomiting are highly likely, and does appear to be more dangerous. Dizziness, headache, increased heart rate, palpitations, chest tightness, blurred vision may be some of the first noticeable effects. Again, maybe there is a kind of rush there given this activity, but the side effects probably make it undesirable. Wakefulness is there at the very least. With the sodium channels open, it naturally causes the hyperexcitation, but there's many reports where they only tried it just once, or for a short period, suggesting the pros don't outweigh the cons. Many people who come to abuse this stuff though are in a state that they really don't care how much they live or die. Suicidal ideation comes up often. Dosages. Given the nature of this, there is no dosing guidelines by any means. It's an unregulated dangerous practice. Wasp sprays could contain different chemicals, there's no chemistry done on the exact ways it's heated up and crystallized. There's just so many variances and dangers there that naturally, of course, there are no official dosing guidelines. Timeline. This is kind of the same as before, in that there's little documentation concerning this, but we can kind of make a guess from the pharmacokinetics and the half-life. Through most of the ROAs, it most likely will begin very shortly after taking it, which this can be confirmed by the rush users do report. But the metabolism is pretty quick, like we said, about 24 to 48 hours. From this, we could guess the effects last for hours, though something like CNS redistribution could cause effects to dissipate faster, and there most likely will be some after effects, whether that be psychological or physical. But due to limited data, we don't have an exact timeline, especially considering the psychological impact. Risk and dangers. Overdose potential. LD50, LC50. So if we haven't made this clear, this stuff most likely has a high overdose potential. Again, various ingredients make this difficult, so we'll just focus on the classes and the risk involved. For pyrethroids, we can somewhat infer based on rat studies where an LC50 was found ranging from 23 to 1000 milligrams per cubic squared. An LD50 for oral consumption was 480 to 900 milligrams per kilogram. Technically at this dose, this would be class 2, which is moderately hazardous to humans and extremely toxic to fish and invertebrates. But rat studies aren't exactly perfect for predicting human reactions, plus this doesn't account for how it gets crystallized. But a bigger concern might be with the other ingredients. PBO, of course, is going to increase the risk of the active ingredients. Any solvents or propellants most likely are going to be much more of a risk in a case of an overdose, especially if this is taken orally. Again though, maybe there is something there with this crystallization process. some of the ingredients or risk could be bypassed or lessened. Still, with the activity we covered, especially if you're someone who's at risk, this is most likely super dangerous to try it all at any time, regardless of the dose. In the next section, we'll show some overdoses. Addictiveness. Again, we're limited with data, but we do have some stuff to go off of. This does involve probably substance abuse, which does somewhat fuzzy the data and the picture. We know at the very least, it can somewhat satisfy cravings of drug users with a past addiction, most commonly with stimulants like methamphetamine. The cost factor does make this more appealing and easy to attain, same with the legality aspect, which is not great if you're addicted to it. But most data I've come across, it's not something many are prone to repeat, especially for a long time. There are some binges reported with it, but with long-term use, it seems to cause unfavorable effects. So how addictive it is on its own is pretty obscure, but for the most part, I say there's low potential. More potential for unwanted side effects and or an overdose. Street dangers. So this is actually a bit of a concern. Who's to say how often this actually gets done, but this very well could be used to cut another substance, most likely methamphetamine. There have been mentions of dealers doing this, probably with users who might be too hooked to really notice. Again, a huge lack of data here with this, but I imagine it isn't done very often, and probably in a select few areas, if ever. But easily, there's an economic incentive by doing this. So let's say you're even just a casual meth user, realistically, this could be a risk for you. Again though, I feel like this is uncommon, but still, it is a possibility. Treatment. So if someone ingests this, there's not a cure, there's no antidotes. The treatment is typically just supportive, meaning that the symptoms get managed and your body's gonna have to deal with it. Sometimes they'll help with breathing, if seizure seems to be a risk, a benzo might be given, possibly something else depending on the symptoms. But the only real treatment from this point is time. If it is injected, the area where it's injected most likely will need treatment, as the cells around the area will most likely go through necrosis, where antibiotics will be followed up with. And if addiction does happen, behavioral therapies typically are recommended. Personal accounts. Case reports. Okay, so I just want to lay out some of the more real details from the studies and reports we've been referencing. There's this case where it may have been linked to 3 overdose deaths in West Virginia. Of course, all the users seeking it as a meth alternative. Another report here comes from Ohio, where 3 people were jailed over it, where it was suspected to be mixed with meth. Then another one coming from Texas, where a 29-year-old woman injected it. It was confirmed to be crystallized Wasp spray. This one would end in death, where she had to be hospitalized for molten organ failure, but wasn't able to make it and died 9 days after being in the hospital. Like the other reports, it isn't definitive the wasp spray solely caused the death, but it did most likely contribute in some way. Then there's another study done here where 5 injections were recorded, mostly as a suicide attempt. Necrosis, or premature cell death, was found in all of the patients. Swelling and immobilities around the areas were also common. Leukocytosis, or a high white blood cell count, was also common. And while all patients do recover, there is no note of this being the crystallized form. Researchers do note they believe the hydrocarbons were mostly responsible for the effects. Okay, and we'll bring up one more. A 22-year-old male claimed having abused wasp spray for about 8 weeks, because it was simply cheaper compared to meth. He reported getting a rush from it and would crystallize it and smoke it. He said he knew others that would inject it. He was admitted though because he slashed his throat with a machete and had suicidal behavior, a common trend with this. But besides that, there are more cases out there. This is just a handful to give an example. They all seem to have their variances, have shown to happen in different places, but for the most part, it shows that the abuse of it can be very dangerous whether that be physical or psychological. Quotes. So I tried to find some actual quotes from users, but I couldn't find any. But I did find this one report where it was of a victim or, a witness who saw, what went down, and this is how he describes the situation. It gives the energy pretty well.
We were making cookies and he just came in the side door. He came over here and got a drink of water, and then he was like mumbling around and stuff.
Hollis then removed a knife from the butcher block and cut his throat.
And my mom was like, "You're bleeding on all of our stuff. Like, can you not?"
From there, an all-out ransacking began. First, he threw a dresser down the stairs.
From the stairs and threw it and hit the wall and busted it.
Then jumped out a second-story window, landing on a gazebo, breaking his neck. At one point, Danny Hollis left the house through the front door and started chasing after the family down the street. By the time deputies got here, Danny was up in this tree completely naked, and as deputies were trying to tase him, he was throwing fecal matter at them back onto the ground. What's going through your mind?
This is crazy. It was like a movie.
It took us all by surprise. We call it wall spray dope.
When you see what it did to this guy, can you believe that anyone would want to take this drug?
No. Never.
Potential future conclusion. Okay, moving forward, what kind of research and attention should Wasping receive? Well, to begin with, at the very least, I think, there needs to be some kind of programs, a kind of community outreach. Just options for those in rough states like this. The better we guide people, the better we guide the youth, and the more we actually set up an environment where they feel comfortable and satisfied with their lives, the less people are going to partake in this. And spreading this information itself, I think, is also important, as the actual harm and risk can be underplayed when you're living fast like that. Besides that, it wouldn't hurt to have more research regarding the crystallized form of this, and just more studies with humans with various ROAs. We have a fair idea of how it may work, seen some cases with it, but far from what I feel like is a standard. It's pretty unpredictable with the various ingredients out there. But who's to say exactly how wasping will exist down the road? Hopefully no future at all for it. The economy could be a big factor, but I still don't see it becoming a trend like that. More of a low-key dirty alternative for those desperate enough. But yeah, that's about it for this wasping video. Covered most of the basic necessities concerning this behavior and substance, if you want to call it that. It's a commercial insecticide used mainly as a meth replacement. Many people who use it seem to be in a distressing state where suicidal traits may be common. The risk of danger is really strong, as we need more research to understand the full scope of what's going on. Either way, make sure you never partake in this. Know that it's super dangerous. If you know of people doing this, it's probably a sign they need intervention and help. But let me know what you thought of this video. Did you feel like I covered everything I should have? Did I miss anything? Also, let me know what I should cover next. This one was requested, so I'm open to anything, not just grimy stuff like this, but really any substance this channel will cover. But make sure to like, subscribe, share the video if you enjoyed. It's been someone that's no one, and I'll see you next time. Peace out.